Hello, my name's Sandra Reddish and I'm producing a series of vlogs around men's domestic abuse of women. Each vlog will introduce a different subject. Now, I talk about men's abuse of women because that's my area of expertise. I only work with women survivors, not male survivors. Different dynamics play a part when it's women's abuse of men. So this is the reason I'm talking about men's abuse of women. So today we're going to talk about isolation, which is so often a feature of domestic abuse. Domestic abusive men often have a mad jealousy, and this motivates them to want to isolate their intimate partner. They will often consider their intimate partner to be their property to control, to dictate to, and to check up on. They will often have a jealousy around her contact with other men. They might not be able to cope with her speaking to other men, working with other men. They will generally want to sexually control her. They have an insecurity that if they don't do this, she will be off with other men, she will be sleeping around, and she won't be loyal or faithful. And why do they feel like this? They will often have a massive insecurity, and this is because they're narcissists, so they give off a veneer of superficial charm, gregariousness, centre of attention, confidence, often this showy-offy behaviour. Underneath all of that, they will generally feel broken, not good enough, and very, very vulnerable. So in controlling their intimate partner and exerting this isolation over her, so she's not able to talk to other men, so she might not be allowed to work, so she is kept indoors sometimes, so she's not allowed to socialise even sometimes with family and friends. It gives him a sense of control over his property. It gives him some reassurance that she won't be able to go off flirting with other men or having relationships with other men. Another reason that men like to isolate women is to make them vulnerable. Without support structures in place, without friends that they can easily talk to, without family that they can go to, without a GP that they can see, they will become very vulnerable. Other people give you a frame of reference, give you emotional support, practical support, help. Without all of these things, women can become very vulnerable. They are less likely to understand that what is happening to them is abusive. They won't have friends who say, hang on a minute, that's not right, he's treating you really badly. Their situation might feel quite normal to them because nobody's there to tell them otherwise. It's also quite depressing not to have support around you. We're all sociable beings, and without the comfort of family and friends and people who are there for us and the love of other people, it is very, very, very difficult to be happy, to have good self-esteem. So isolation corrodes the self-esteem, it corrodes the confidence. Abusive men like women to be weak, like them to be weak and needy, because when weak and needy, the men feel more powerful, more in control, more able to exert power and control over the women, and it's basically all about power and control. Every feature of domestic abuse is about the need for abusive men to maintain power and control over women, and isolation is so often a feature in this. With the women I support, almost invariably they have either been isolated or I ask the question, are you isolated? It's a question that features on risk assessment forms, and they will either agree that they have been or they are, or if they're not, they invariably will say, but he tried, but I wouldn't have it. He tried to be rude to my friends but I wouldn't allow that to happen. So they will seemingly pretty much always try. And it's a very, very, very effective tactic in breaking women down so that men can hold this power and control over them. So if we think about how men isolate women, often early in the relationship, they might suggest to women that they can fill every need that they have. We often know that love bombing happens early in a relationship, just being besotted, being adoring, fast tracking the relationship, all of these features. They will want to appear everything to the woman so that she doesn't need anybody else. He might say, oh, well, let's spend a weekend in bed and cancel relationships with, cancel your family and friends coming over. We don't need them. We've got each other. Why would we need anybody else? And that might seem lovely. However, not when it continues. They will very often want to stop the woman working, because when you think about work, it's a massive aspect of anybody's life. It gives you independence, it gives you financial independence, it gives colleagues. There is a huge support structure associated with work. Often there is an attempt or a successful attempt at stopping women working. Now, I've had situations where there will be deliberate black eyes and women have felt unable to turn up at work on a Monday morning because they've got black eyes. They're too humiliated to say, I can't come in because I've been assaulted. It can take more than a week for a bruise to heal, and then they'd need a certificate from the doctor. They might not be allowed to go to their doctor. Horrendous. That can be the way it's done. Men might say, oh, well, I'll look after you. You don't need to work anymore. I'll pay for everything. I'm going to fulfill every need that you ever have. They might show wild jealousy around male colleagues and just refuse to allow their women to work with men and just stop it and use bully, control, aggressive tactics to intimidate women into giving up their jobs. Or they might push for an early baby, a pregnancy, promise that they'll do their part of the childcare. I'll take extended paternity leave. We'll look after this child together. And then when the baby's born, just totally renege on all those promises. When the woman goes out and he's looking after the baby, he might phone her up every time the baby cries and hold the baby to the screaming to the phone so that her evening is wrecked and she feels forced to come home. Having children is a highly effective strategy of isolating women. Sometimes he might go to work and deliberately take the pushchair and the child car seat with him so that she's stuck in the house with the baby and can't go out all day. Loads of tactics are employed here. If she's given up her work, then he might financially abuse her. We know that financial abuse is so is almost invariably a feature of any other type of domestic abuse. And without money, she might not be able to go out with the baby, to socialise with friends. It can be a huge problem. So there are other ways that he can isolate. He might be rude to family and friends when they come round so that they don't want to come round again, so that she feels embarrassed and doesn't want to invite them again. Quite often he may sulk when she's socialised, act like he's upset, that he's hurt, that isn't he enough for her. Lots of different tactics are used, and so often women end up thinking it's just really not worth the effort, and not pushing to have these relationships outside of the home. So another feature that's really common is that family and friends will actively isolate the survivor. there's often a complete lack of understanding around domestic abuse and what the woman might be suffering. And family and friends might dish out advice like, just leave him, and when she doesn't, or she leaves and goes back, they'll say, well, you chose to go back to that relationship, or I keep telling you to leave and you won't, what do you expect? And they can sometimes draw themselves away because they're appalled at her behaviour, because they think she deserves what she gets. Very common. If she has a child removed from her care because she is unable or feels unable to leave the abusive relationship, then family and friends really can come down very, very harshly, make all sorts of judgments, really, really not understand the dynamics going on, and they will very often turn their backs on her. Sometimes domestic abuse makes women feel the need to self-medicate on sometimes drugs, sometimes alcohol. A lot of judging goes on around that issue with family and friends, not liking her behaviour, making negative judgments, telling her not to do it, and quite often withdrawing because they don't like what they're seeing. And they're just not understanding the impact of domestic abuse and how that makes a woman feel and the desperation surrounding it. Women sometimes struggle with family shame. So if they leave a domestic abusive relationship and they are in a family who feels dishonoured or shamed by their actions, they will often find themselves completely isolated from the family. Often it seems to be the case that the perpetrator will jump on the family's side and work against her. This is a huge issue and can make women feel very vulnerable and very alone. So family and friends are often a major factor in isolating women. It's not just the perpetrator, it's often a lack of understanding from family and friends that can make the situation a whole lot worse for her. Also, the manipulation of the perpetrator can work very much against the woman. So women in domestically abusive situations, when they're invested in the relationship, they're not understanding the abuse they're suffering, they're hoping things will work out. They don't often go and tell everybody about the situation. They don't talk about the abuse they're suffering. They don't necessarily confide in their family and friends. They're still invested in wanting the relationship to work. And often they'll disclose the abuse at the point of wanting to leave. And family and friends just don't understand because, well, why didn't she tell me this when she was with him? He seemed really nice. Sometimes he'll go on the charm offensive and project and appear devastated. He couldn't do enough for her. He was always walking on eggshells and she was so abusive, always losing her temper. He was scared. He might say that she's been so promiscuous, she was always having affairs. It broke his heart. He's absolutely devastated. They might go on a social media campaign to basically rubbish her personality, very often making them appear the victim. And it's amazing how many people are suckers for this and will side with him. Women very often have to do a friendship audit when this kind of thing happens and just work out who's on their side and withdraw from the people who aren't. So it's really, really common dynamic for friends and family to be manipulated against the survivor, and this just can make her so badly isolated. There's also the jealous friends phenomena. So women will often think that they've got a collection of friends if they haven't been completely isolated. And at the point of ending the relationship, when the perpetrator goes on a manipulative campaign of rubbishing her personality, it's really, really common for women to find that their friends are talking to the perpetrator, are working against them, are siding with him, are basically frenemies or completely hostile towards her. Such a common dynamic. I like to think that part of the reason for this, well, part of the reason is they might not believe that she was being abused. They might be actually genuinely won over by him. Also, not uncommon for people to enjoy the drama of other people's relationships, purport to be friends, purport to be listening, but actually sneakily talk to the perpetrator and just enjoy all the drama around it. Normally, I'd say these people, they do it because their lives are a bit dull and boring, or they're jealous, or there's something going wrong in their lives. I think kind people who have no reason to need drama, the majority of people you like to think wouldn't operate like this, but it's very often a feature of domestic abuse that people who you think are your friends are actually talking to the perpetrator and actively working against you. And women I've supported, sometimes they've had to jettison their friends and start from scratch because they haven't been able to trust anybody. Or they might get friends who say, well, I can still be friends with both of you when there's abuse. Is that appropriate? Possibly not. It really often doesn't work. And so terrible isolation can happen after the relationship, after the survivor might have left as well. It's a really, really bad and very, very common dynamic. A horrible dynamic happens when the perpetrator turns the children hostile towards their mother. And this is more common than you'd like to think. Men will so often manipulate their children, and children are often vulnerable to believing it. If she chooses to leave, he might say to them, oh, I'm so sad and lonely. I loved mummy so much, but now she's gone. Or I haven't got enough money to pay for food. I've got nowhere to live. I really loved her so much, but she doesn't love me anymore. And if the children are manipulated against their mother, often other people are persuaded by this, and their relationship with the woman can also be damaged by it. It's an insidious thing that abusive men do, to use the children and manipulate the children against their mother. It so often happens. He'll often also go out of his way to be the fun parent, taking them to McDonald's all the time, indulging them with junk food, and no boundaries and no strictness. So the children might go home to her and feel a bit hostile towards her, and she might lose the confidence she had in knowing the children are there for her. It can happen with adult children as well, and it's a horrible dynamic that can add to her isolation. And another feature of isolation is that women, when they're abused, will often isolate themselves, because isolation has such a corrosive impact on confidence, self-esteem, sense of self-worth. It can often feel easier to stay at home, to not socialise, to withdraw, to lose confidence in socialising. If they're being financially abused, which is almost for sure they are, they might not have money to be able to afford to go out, to be able to wear nice clothes that they feel confident in. They might not want to go out when they've got bruises on their face, when they've got injuries that they're trying to hide. It might feel humiliating to them. And very often it's the case that they might not want intrusive questions from their friends, that they feel shamed by the abuse that they're suffering. And depression and anxiety are so commonly features of domestic abuse that when in that state of feeling depressed, feeling anxious, it can feel overwhelming to go out, to socialise, to make social contacts. They're also hiding this appalling life that they're living. And women, so for all these collection of reasons, may want to isolate themselves. So as we can see, there's a bit of an isolation triangle happens. You get men wanting to isolate women for reasons of power and control, the mad jealousy and the and the need to demean women, the desire to make them more vulnerable. Then you get the family and friends who can isolate and turn hostile, withdraw. Why doesn't she do what we've told her to do? Why doesn't she just leave the relationship? I've told her to. I'm washing my hands of the problem. And then you get the last part of the triangle. Women isolate themselves. I need to hide these bruises. I haven't got any money to go out. I feel ashamed at what's happening to me. I've just got no energy. I just feel depressed. I just want to lie in bed all day. It's not just men doing it. It's the whole, as I call it, an isolation triangle that goes on, and it's very powerful, and it's very difficult to get out of. Difficult. So many women I've supported, lovely women with potentially everything going for them, will tell me they have absolutely no friends, none at all, no friends. You just think, how can that happen? So common, so common with domestic abuse, and it's terrible. Your true friends will be on your side, whatever is said on social media. If people want to be persuaded by this rubbish, maybe they're not your proper friends anyway, and you're better off without them. It's really hard. The only way is to try not to care. The other thing is to potentially report to the police if it's harassment worth reporting, and it might be that the police can do something to intervene. It depends on how serious it is. It's a difficult one. They don't always intervene straight away, but potentially there might be criminal offences involved. Self-care is a real priority when recovering from domestic abuse. So isolation can very often damage our sense of self-esteem, our sense of value and worth. It's really important to build that back up with self-care, with prioritising our needs, with working out what you want and what's going to make you happy. Return to work if this is possible. If you've lost employment as a result of the domestic abuse, as a result of the isolation that you've been subjected to, do everything that you can to regain employment if that's what's best for you. So much you can gain from employment, self-esteem, confidence, colleagues, income, finances, a sense of purpose. If at all possible, go back to work. So as we can see, this is a massive, massive issue. If you feel isolated following or during a domestically abusive relationship, you're not alone. Almost invariably, there's either isolation happens or an attempt. Any subject in domestic abuse is difficult, triggering. I think it's important that we feel grounded. What I do to ground myself is to stroke my dog, and I don't know if I can get her up, but I'm going to try. So she's called Molly. She's a golden retriever, and I just want to show her to you because she's gorgeous. Come on, Molly, look. Oh, got the screen too high. Whoa. It's really important to have something to make you feel grounded, to make you feel comfortable, whether it's an animal, a meditation technique, exercise. This is my grounding opportunity. She drags me out on a dog walk twice a day. If she doesn't have one that she feels, she guilt trips me, and it is so good.